Today's case is one that starts with a missing child, but the desperate searches for him quickly spiral into something far darker. Another disturbing truth that's been hidden for years. When Ben went missing, no one could have imagined that the pulling of this one thread would lead to the untangling of yet another case that went unsolved for almost half a decade. But before I get into this wild ride of a case, I want to take a moment to say thank you to Quince for partnering with me on today's video. Personally, I'm someone who hates going out shopping. I hate having to go to all sorts of different stores or different online shops to get the things that I'm looking for, whether it's clothing, home goods, or just everyday items. So that is where Quince comes in. They bring it all together. One destination, premium quality, and affordable prices. They offer everything you can imagine, from European linen apparel, which is the super comfy button-up that I'm wearing right now, to buttery soft bamboo bedding, 14-karat gold jewelry, travel essentials, and beautiful Italian leather bags. Quince brings all the high-end essentials together in one place. And guess what? Their products are priced about 50% less than what you'd find at similar brands. By working directly with top-tier manufacturers and cutting out the middleman, Quince gives you exceptional quality without the markup. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. Personally, I got a couple different items from Quince. As I stated, I got this linen button-up, but I also got a pair of straight-leg jeans and this solid green shirt, both of which fit me absolutely perfectly. I also got these pair of comfy joggers for working out or just lounging, and let me tell you, they've become a part of my everyday wear. If they're clean, I'm wearing them. They're just so comfortable. So upgrade your wardrobe, home, and more with high-end essentials from Quince. Head to quince.com/RachelShannon by using the link in the description box below to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Thank you again so much to Quince for partnering with me on today's video. With all of that being said, let's get into today's case. The morning of January 8th, 2007 started as any normal day for 13-year-old Ben Owensby and his family. The family, who lived in an apartment in Kirkwood, Missouri, got Ben ready for school that day before he made his way to the bus stop. He went about his school day as normal before he got on the bus to head back home. However, when Ben failed to return home when he normally did, his parents immediately started to panic. As it is in so many families, they had their routine. Ben would wake up at the same time every morning, go to school in the morning, and then return home around 3 or 3:30 every single day. But when 4 o'clock came and went with no sign of Ben, his parents knew that something had to be wrong. By that time, they called the local police to report him as a missing person. Right away, the Franklin County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene, where they spoke to Doris and Don. Based on the story they were told, they knew that they needed to take immediate action, so they called in the help of the FBI and started deploying search and rescue teams to scour the area in search for Ben. Through those searches, they came into contact with multiple other children who took the same bus as he did. One of those children was one of Ben's close friends, 15-year-old Mitch. After learning of his friend's disappearance, he got into contact with police to tell them what he knew. Mitch told the officers that he saw Ben get off the school bus at around 3:30 p.m. before the two went their separate ways to walk the rest of the way home. So from that, we know that Ben at least made it to school and made it back to the bus. But after getting off the bus, Mitch noticed that there was a pickup truck parked nearby, which pulled away really quickly after they went their separate ways. The truck seemed to have escaped the scene, which just really stood out to Mitch. He went on to describe the truck in great detail. It was a 90s model white pickup with the Nissan logo and dark lettering on the tailgate. There was a camper on top with an elongated window on the side and knobs on the side. It had a 2-inch trailer hitch on the back, and there was either rust or dirt all over the fender. At first, when officers heard this description from Mitch, they almost didn't believe him. They had never heard such a detailed description of a vehicle from an adult, let alone a 15-year-old teenager. But Mitch said that he was a car and truck fanatic, so he was keen on knowing detailed information about the vehicles that he noticed. So, using this very descriptive information, police took casts of the tire treads left behind from the truck and put out an APB across the state to keep on the lookout for this white truck. For the 2 days that followed, exhaustive and desperate searches continued for the missing boy. Classmates, friends, family members, police, FBI, and members of the community all came out in droves to help find 13-year-old Ben. But then, by Thursday, January 11th, officers received a tip that led them to Emo's Pizzeria located in Kirkwood, about 45 minutes away from where Ben went missing. The tip came from an employee of the store, Mike Prosperi. Mike told the officers that he saw the APB and noticed that his manager at the pizzeria also had a white truck that seemed to closely match the description of the truck in question. He said that his manager, 41-year-old Mike Delvin, so another Mike, showed up to work the morning of Ben's disappearance, but he appeared kind of pale and sickly. He then left work early that day at around 12:50 p.m. He then called in sick for the 2 days that followed. That was unusual for him because the two had worked together for a very long time, and Mike had never called out sick so many days in a row, let alone right around the same time that a little boy went missing. And given that his truck matched the APB, he just had a gut feeling that something was off. So Mike Prosperi decided to head over to his manager's apartment to check on him, and that is when he saw something suspicious on his truck. He noticed what looked like some red dust on the bumpers of the car, like what you would get if you were driving on the gravel off-roads in the country outside the city. Mike wondered if his manager had been sick the past few days. What was he doing off-roading? And again, it's not like he had just called in sick and was maybe using it as an excuse to go out and blow off steam. We've all called in sick when we may not have actually been sick and just wanted the day off. But the day Mike Delvin left work early, his employee noticed that he actually did look sick. So again, if he was sick for 3 days, what was he doing off-roading? Based on this, Mike Prosperi decided to call the police to report what he saw. As that was happening with Mike Prosperi, other officers were responding to the same apartment complex where Mike Delvin lived for an unrelated call. When there, they also noticed the white pickup truck with the same description as the APB, dirt on the bumpers and all. They took some time to watch the apartment nearby where the truck was parked, and they watched as Mike and a teenage boy came outside to take out the trash. These officers did actually recognize Mike because they had been at the pizzeria where he worked because it was located right around the corner from the police station. At that time, the two officers went over to him to ask about his truck and asked if they could come inside the apartment, but he refused. They also spoke to the teenage boy who identified himself as Mike's godson. He said that he was staying with Mike because his mom died and his dad was on a business trip in New York. The boy was clearly not Ben. The cops didn't recognize him, and he seemed totally calm and normal. He didn't seem dodgy or scared or anything like that. So at that time, these officers had no way of forcing either of them to cooperate, so they just called in what they found, and then they set up an overnight surveillance of the area to make sure they could keep their eye on Mike in the meantime. The following day, FBI agents followed up at Emo's Pizzeria to speak with Mike Delvin and check out his truck. This time, they were planning to apply a little more pressure, given that he had already been confronted before he knew the walls were closing in. The first thing the agents noticed when entering the pizzeria to speak with Delvin was that he faced them and agreed to talk, but he wouldn't look at either of the agents in the eye. He was acting evasive and seemed uncomfortable, which obviously made them sus. They asked him if they could search his truck, which was a white 1991 Nissan pickup, to which he agreed. According to officers, as they started searching, another officer invited him to sit in the backseat of the unmarked police car and made some conversation. At first, Mike was acting calm and collected, but as they continued asking more and more questions, they noticed that Mike's carotid pulse, so the pulse that you can find in your neck, was bounding out of control. His heart was beating so hard and so fast that they could actually see his pulse going in his neck. Then Mike kept circling back and trying to talk about his godson named Shawn. When he would bring up Shawn, they noticed that his pulse got even crazier and crazier. As they got further into the conversation, officers remembered that there had been another boy with that same name who went missing from the area 4 years prior. And that is when they realized that this man, 41-year-old Mike Delvin, may not have only been responsible for Ben's abduction, but he may have abducted another young boy. Based on everything they've gathered up to that point, according to the officer conducting this interview, they just decided to go for it, play their full deck of cards. They told Mike that they took forensic evidence, the casting of the tires, which would come back and match to his car. They said that it was basically like a fingerprint, and if they matched, he would be arrested. And according to that officer, in that moment, that is when Mike admitted that he abducted Ben Owensby 3 days prior. Not only that, but Shawn is not his godson. Shawn is actually Shawn Hornbeck, an 11-year-old boy who had been abducted years prior on October 6th, 2002.
I asked him if he knew who owned the white vehicle. I said, yeah, it's mine.
Okay.
And from that point on, we kind of recognized him as working at Emo's, and so we'd talked to him before, had a good rapport with him, and began talking to him. It was kind of like me sitting here talking to you.
Uh-huh.
As the questions got more specific,
Uh-huh.
his demeanor changed, his whole, attitude and body, and so it was totally 180 degrees from where he was at to where he went, and it's a side that I've never seen before, and Officer Nelson had never seen before, so it kind of threw up some red flags for us. It's a little different.
So now let's go back to that fateful morning, back to the home located in Richwoods, Missouri. On the evening of October 6, 2002, Shawn asked his mom, Pam, and his stepdad, Craig, if he could ride his bike to a friend's house. This was something that he had done multiple times before without issue. Of course, he was an 11-year-old boy, which is right around the time that children will start wanting more freedom from their parents. They want to test their independence. So his parents agreed, and by around 4 p.m. that evening, he was off on his bike. But hours passed, and when Shawn failed to return home when he was supposed to, of course, his parents went into a panic. They called the authorities, and before long, officers, volunteers, and the family all joined in on search efforts to try and locate Shawn. With his disappearance, the searchers were tasked with searching through rough terrain. Richwoods is a small town surrounded by miles-long stretches of woods with creeks, ponds, caves, strip mines, abandoned farms, and trailers. Officers brought out sniffer dogs to see if they could trace where he went, and the dogs did pick up his scent, but it didn't lead them anywhere useful. For the weeks, then months, then years that followed, police and searchers failed to find any sign of Shawn. According to investigators, they followed up on over 400 leads. They drained lakes, sent dive teams into rivers, and searched through caves. They questioned numerous witnesses or potential persons of interest and checked any abandoned buildings and farms in the area, all without any luck. All the while, his parents and 2 older sisters lived in agony. When police started scaling back their searches, they were determined to keep going. They cashed out all of their life savings and retirements. They created the Shawn Hornbeck Foundation, and with that, an email tip line. Through the foundation, they created search and rescue teams to continue in the search efforts. And even when Shawn was still missing, they also used their time and energy into spreading awareness about other missing children's cases because they knew how horrible it felt to have a missing child. And even though they were still set on finding Shawn, they didn't want anyone else to experience what they were going through. As the years passed, the family's hope started to dwindle. They knew deep down that every day that passed without finding a body was still a sign that he could be alive. But as most of us know, the longer someone is missing, the less and less likely it is that they will be found alive. But little did the Hornbecks know, Shawn was alive, and he had been living less than an hour away from their home all along, being held captive by a monster who abused and tortured him. So now fast forwarding to January 11th, 2007, to when FBI agents confronted 41-year-old Michael Devin in that pizzeria, and when he admitted to abducting both Owen and Shawn. After this admission, the officer called for backup and told Mike that they were going to head to his apartment and he was going to let them in. When they pulled up, Mike went to the door and unlocked it, only opening it about 4 or 5 inches. But it was enough for the officer to look inside, and when she did, she saw a young man sitting on the couch playing video games. Once officers stepped into that apartment, they saw 2 young men, and the first one turned and looked at them with a stunned look on his face. He appeared frozen and didn't know what to say or do. But in that moment, they then saw Ben, who asked them, "Are you here to take me home?" He then stood up and rushed towards the officer, who handed him off to another officer to take him outside. Then this officer turned her attention to the frozen, now 15-year-old boy in front of her. She asked him to identify himself, and after some hesitation, the boy finally said that his name is Shawn Hornbeck. They were astonished to learn that this boy, who went missing almost half a decade ago, was still alive. At that time, officers immediately arrested Mike Delvin and called Ben's parents to give them the incredible news. As expected, Doris and Dawn were relieved to know that their little boy had been found and that their nightmare is finally over. After that, it was time to contact Shawn's parents. This was a process that took a little bit longer because, again, Shawn had been missing for so long, and even though they had this boy in front of them, they didn't want to get Pam and Craig's hopes up for nothing. But they did eventually call them and told them that they're about 90% confident that Shawn has been located, safe and alive. Of course, both were absolutely stunned and shocked beyond belief. This was a call they had been waiting for over 4 years, and it never came, but now it was here. They were escorted to the police station, where they were led to a room. In that room, they found the 15-year-old boy sitting in the chair with his head down. When he looked up at them, according to Craig and Pam, it was the strangest yet most exhilarating moment. It was strange because obviously Shawn didn't look like the little boy they knew all those years ago. He had aged, hit puberty, and was no longer little. But the second they saw him, they knew he was their boy. They rushed over to him and gave him a hug that lasted over 30 minutes, no one being able to will themselves to let go. The moment they dreamed of for over 4 years was finally here, and there was nothing anyone could do to pull them apart ever again.
At 4:30 on Friday afternoon, 13-year-old Ben Ownby and 15-year-old Shawn Hornbeck were escorted into the Franklin County Sheriff's Department. Ownby was abducted Monday afternoon near his home in Beaufort, Missouri. Hornbeck disappeared 4.5 years ago near his home in Richwoods, Missouri.
Both boys appear at this point to be okay. Obviously, they'll be checked out to make certain that they're in good shape.
The teenage Hornbeck we saw today looked nothing like the young boy from 2002.
He looked like he had probably grown quite a bit, got a little taller, and his hair was darker. But like I said, I'm sure the parents would have recognized him, but if he'd walked into the office, I don't know that I would have.
2 missing boys found at the same time, allowing for a reunion of indescribable emotion between parents and their children.
There was obviously a few tears in there, but sometimes they were speechless, sometimes crying, and it just a happy feeling. You can imagine having your child back after thinking the worst, what your emotions would be, and that's what we saw. To have 2 endings like this is just unbelievable.
After this unbelievable reunion, both boys returned home and adjusted back to life with their families. Obviously, for Shawn, this was a much more difficult transition. He had spent the past 4 years of his life, some of the most formidable years of his life, with his captor. But once he was ready, he did sit down with the FBI and detailed everything he went through throughout those years. And what you are about to hear is horrendous and sickening, so just be prepared. As we know, on October 6, 2002, Shawn left his home on his bike to go to a friend's house, just as he had many times before. But this time, as he was riding his bike, he turned down a gravel side road. Unbeknownst to him, this is the same road where then 38-year-old Mike Delvin had been riding around in his truck, patrolling the area, looking for children to prey upon. As he rode his bike, the truck came up behind him and knocked him off of his bike. He then picked him up and put him in his truck. As they drove away, Mike pointed a gun at him and told him to comply. For the first month of Shawn's captivity, he was locked in the apartment, and anytime Mike left, Shawn was tied up to a futon with tape over his mouth so he couldn't scream. When he was home, he was tortured, sexually assaulted, and abused. Some of the assaults Mike even recorded so he could rewatch as Shawn screamed and begged him to stop. After about a month of captivity, near the end of October in 2002, Mike put Shawn in his truck with the promise that he would take him home. Instead, though, he was taken to a remote logging road where Mike stopped the truck, got out, and told Shawn to get out. Mike brought him around to the back of the truck where Mike started strangling Shawn, fully intent on killing him. But Shawn begged and pleaded for his life, telling Mike that he would do whatever he wanted as long as he didn't kill him. At that point, Mike stopped choking him and agreed not to kill him, but he did sexually assault him once again. From there, they made a deal. Shawn wasn't allowed to contact anyone and should never try to run. If he did either of those things, he would be killed. For the next 4 years, Shawn lived under those two rules. He lived with Mike under his complete and total control. As time passed, Shawn was given more and more freedom because Mike was confident that he was too scared to try and leave. He started leaving Shawn in the apartment alone when he went to work, ran errands, or visited family. During that time, Shawn said that he would just sleep as much as possible because time goes by quicker when you're asleep. Then, 7 months into the abduction, he was allowed to go outside and was even allowed to make friends with the neighbor boy, a 13-year-old named Tony. As the two got closer, Shawn met Tony's family and told them that Mike was his father and that his mother had been killed by a drunk driver. He said that he was homeschooled until eventually he started telling people that he went to a private school. That's why Tony never saw him at public school. That was the information Mike instructed him to tell. For the months and then years that passed, according to the neighbor and other neighbors, Shawn seemed like a typical boy and Mike seemed like a good father. He always had the newest video games and video game consoles. Really, he got whatever he wanted. He was always riding his bike around the neighborhood and appeared free to do whatever he wanted. He had a cell phone to call his friends and had internet access where he was free to use social media. He then started spending more and more time with Tony and his family. He went to his house for sleepovers, spent holidays with them. There were even times in which Shawn interacted with police, but still didn't say anything. Once, in 2003, he contacted local police to report that his bike was stolen. When speaking with officers, he gave them the name Shawn Delvin and said the same story about Mike being his father. Then, by 2006, Shawn and Tony were stopped by local police for riding their bikes past curfew. Nothing was done, and they were taken back to the apartment complex. Once again, Shawn didn't mention anything about the kidnapping. Once, Tony's parents even said that they were watching TV together and a news report came on about Shawn's disappearance. His own image flashed on the TV, but Shawn didn't seem to react to the news story. According to Tony's family, looking back, they remember that he didn't even flinch or make a face. He had no reaction. His mom actually said that she told Shawn that the boy looked like him, but Shawn said that it wasn't and just brushed it off and was like, whatever. Typical response from a teenager. Now, I know some of you might give crap to Tony's mother for, seeing a missing boy on the TV and then seeing a boy that looks like him right in front of her and then, not saying anything to anybody. But, we're all true crime people. We hear cases like this all the time. But for most people, when they think of a kidnapped boy, they're probably picturing him being chained up, being abused, being locked in a room. And that is what happens most of the time. But as we see in this case, and we've seen in other cases like this one, when someone is exerting enough control over someone, they might not say anything and they might try to pass themselves off as acting totally normal and seeming just fine because that is what they've been conditioned to do. So yes, Shawn probably looked just like the picture on the TV, but she probably felt that he had his father, he had his explanation, he seemed to have a normal life, they've known him for years, and by that point she probably felt that if something happened to Shawn, he probably would have confided in her by then. That's what they were thinking by what they've said themselves. Either way, at one point as a teenager, Shawn also got a girlfriend from one of the local schools. The two started dating and hanging out, and other teens around them knew them as a couple. It was even said that Shawn was a bit of a heartthrob around the community, that all the girls liked him and wanted to date him because he was so good looking. Now, as I alluded to just a second ago, through all of this, police have questioned why he didn't say anything to anyone. In fact, after he was found and news came out about it, people scrutinized him for not reporting his abduction. And this is something that I do want to take a moment to discuss because, as we know, he was only 11 years old when he was taken. 11 years old when Mike tried to strangle him to death. 11 years old when Mike said that if he ever tried to run, he would kill him. Mike is also a huge dude. He's 6'4" and 200 pounds. He could easily overpower and hurt Shawn if he stepped out of line. After enough time with the person responsible for making that kind of threat, especially as a child, you're going to believe them totally and completely. Even if you're not in their immediate presence, the thought is always there. Even as he got older, he knew that Mike was capable and willing of murder. He was abused and tortured, and he lived every day with that threat hanging over his head. Then, after a certain amount of time, he obviously formed a bit of a bond with his captor. If you spend enough time with anyone, regardless of how they treat you, of how abusive they are, just being around that person all the time and them being the only parental figure in your life, the only person that you can go to, that is what it starts to feel like. So I don't want to hear anyone in the comments questioning why he didn't leave or why he didn't tell anyone, because there's so many things that go into it. It's such a complicated psychological phenomenon that you really can't understand it unless you've experienced it. But even with that being said, there were a few times in which Shawn did seem to try and connect with his parents because he knew they were out there. He knew that they were looking for him, but he just felt like he couldn't really do anything. Now, like I said, after his disappearance, Pam and Craig set up their website, the Shawn Hornbeck Foundation. Well, on December 1st, 2005, there was one person who sent them an email under the name of Sean Delvin, and the message said, "How long are you planning on looking for your son?" And it was riddled with spelling errors. They didn't end up responding to the email right away, obviously because they didn't know that it was possibly their son. They thought that it was just a random person. So the person sent them another email apologizing for their previous message and asking if it would be okay if he wrote them a poem for their family in Shawn's honor. The email ended by saying, "It would be cool if I could, but if you don't want me to, I understand why, I guess." Again, lots of spelling errors. all this time, the family had no idea it was him. And I point out the spelling errors because, again, we know that all this time he wasn't going to school. Meanwhile, those who knew Mike Delvin said that they knew him to be a normal, plain, private man who just kept to himself. It wasn't like he was this weird recluse who never came out of his home and, really just didn't talk to anybody. He did talk to people, but he just didn't socialize too much. Mike had worked at the pizzeria for some time, but he also worked at a funeral home. Coworkers said that he always showed up to work on time, did his job well, and never caused any issues. His landlord said that he always paid the rent on time and stayed out of trouble. He didn't have any sort of criminal record, and even though he interacted with police a few times, and even when they saw Shawn, no one ever suspected a thing. But then, by early 2007, Shawn said that Mike started looking for a new boy to abduct because Shawn was getting too old. He might run into a lot more problems once he was 18 and needed to get some identification for himself. When that happened, a terrifying reality hit Shawn. He hadn't previously been afraid of death. In fact, he said that sometimes he felt that death would be better than the world he was living under. But he knew that as long as he played by Mike's rules, that he would live to see another day. But when Mike wanted another boy, a younger boy, Shawn started to feel that his days were numbered. He felt that when he was replaced, Mike would get rid of him. So when Ben was brought back to the home, Shawn was terrified, and obviously so was Ben. We don't know a lot about what Ben went through, but I'd imagine it was similar to what Shawn described. We also don't have the full details from what Shawn went through either, because he's chosen not to give the full details, which is 100% understandable. It's his story to tell, and he can disclose whatever he feels is appropriate. Either way, as we know, just 3 days after 13-year-old Ben was taken, both boys were discovered, and Shawn finally felt safe enough to disclose his real identity. For the first time in 4.5 years, Shawn could say his real name without the threat of harm. To me, I think that maybe seeing Ben being saved is truly what gave Shawn the courage to speak up. Because if Ben was going to be safe, then he would be too. So after Mike Delvin's arrest, he was handed over 80 charges from the multiple counties where the crimes took place, including torture, sexual abuse, kidnapping, and attempted murder. He also faced federal charges for making the videotapes of the torture and for transporting Shawn over state lines multiple times. And even though he confessed to all of his crimes, at his plea hearing, he appeared via video link where he pleaded not guilty.
This afternoon, a little while ago, we filed a total of 71 counts against Michael Delvin. The first 18 counts, involve 1 count of kidnapping and 17 counts of forcible sodomy relating to an abduction that occurred in January of this year. The remainder of the counts include a kidnapping and forcible sodomy counts for an abduction that occurred in 2001. Each involving a separate victim. Those are the only 2 victims. As I said, there are a total of 71 counts. Each is a felony, each carrying up to life in prison.
What do you have to say, Devlin?
Okay, Mr. Devlin, my name is Judge Tobin. You're here for a preliminary arraignment. Mr. Devlin, how do you wish to plead to this matter? Mr. Devlin?
I'm not guilty.
Okay.
Then, at another hearing, Shawn and Mike both testified to what happened during his captivity. Mike admitted to wanting to kill Shawn, but agreeing not to as long as Shawn followed his rules and didn't try to escape. Shawn also outlined some of the sexual abuse and torture that he suffered all those years. After this hearing came time for trial, but to everyone's surprise, Mike Delvin actually pleaded guilty to his charges. It took a long time to come up with a plea deal because there were so many charges and so many, different moving parts in this case. But he ended up pleading guilty to the federal charges as well as charges of kidnapping, sexual assault, attempted murder, and 69 counts of sodomy. Since these charges were spread over multiple counties, he did receive multiple sentences, so again, this was just a process that took a very long time. But for the kidnapping, sexual assault, and attempted murder, he received a sentence of 3 life terms plus 60 years. For the 69 sodomy charges, he received 18 consecutive life sentences, meaning that he will never see the day of light again and will never be free to do this to another boy ever again.
Mr. Devlin had been looking for a child for over 3 months and had been looking in the rural areas, Jefferson County, Franklin County, driving down to schools. His modus was to go to schools, look for kids that were getting onto school buses and going to get off early. Young boys that were alone would get off the school bus. So this wasn't planned for Ben. Ben just happened to be the victim that he found, but this was a deliberate act on his part.
I am so thankful that he got the sentence he deserves. Let me tell you, I've seen so many cases where a child is abducted and tortured, and just because they managed to live, their captor is given a light sentence. I once covered a case years ago when a man kidnapped a little boy, held him, abused him for 7 years, and when he was caught and charged, he was only given 6 or 7 years behind bars. I just remember it being less than the amount of time he held that boy captive. It was insane, and of course he went on to kill someone. But it seems like the prosecution in this case truly understood the full gravity of what this sick monster did, and they know that he will do it again, and he will probably kill someone if he's released. So they made sure that this wouldn't happen. I also want to note that most people, including the prosecution and the families of both boys, they believe that Mike pleaded guilty because he didn't want to have to detail all of the horrific things he did in a trial. So he took the easy way out, pleading out so that he didn't have to reveal the full extent of how hideous he truly is. So he did take the coward's way out, but at the same time, I am glad that neither Shawn or Ben had to live through the horrors again, and neither do their families, and it's not like he got a light sentence because of his guilty plea. I do think he got as much of a sentence as he could have gotten at that time. Thankfully, each boy went on to adjust back to their lives with their families. They both started school again, underwent extensive counseling, and spent the following years learning to live life again. I'm sure both families are permanently scarred and will have to live with these underlying fears and the trauma that they've suffered for the rest of their lives, but they at least got their boys back. After all of this came to a close, both boys seem to be doing well, or at least as well as can be expected after what they lived through. And I want to take a moment to give credit to that 15-year-old Mitch who spoke with police and gave them that case-breaking tip, which allowed them to solve an almost 5-year-long case. I also want to give credit to that coworker of Mike's who saw something odd and followed his gut. This case is a horrifying example of what can happen when a child is left alone for even a minute, but it's also an example of what can happen if you follow your gut. Without Mitch, who knows how long Ben would have suffered in that apartment? Who knows if Mike would have kept either of them alive? Because Mitch, who again was only 15, noticed that something was off, he made the report and saved his friend and another boy his age. When I first learned of this case, I knew I wanted to cover it because we are constantly seeing examples of children and adults being subjected to horrific things and nobody doing anything about it. But today, we have an example of a case where people followed their gut, made the reports, and got 2 cases solved. So if you take anything from this case, I just want it to be, if you see something, say something. If you feel in your gut that something is wrong, there's no harm in reporting it. If that truck turned out not to be connected to the case, then oh well, no one got hurt in the process. But if it does turn out to mean something, and if you choose to just let it be, it probably wasn't a big deal anyways, you never know what you could have passed up on. If Mitch decided that the truck probably meant nothing and decided not to report it, I might be telling you a very different story today. So again, if your gut tells you something is off, I urge you to follow it. But that is where this case comes to a close, and now I want to hear what you all think. Why do you think it took so long to find Shawn? Do you think this case would have been solved if Mike didn't take Ben? Do you think Mike would have ended up hurting Shawn? And what do you think of the charges and sentence Mike received? Let's discuss this and any other thoughts you have in the comments below. If you like this video, please make sure to go ahead and leave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. Don't forget to turn that notification bell on so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Spotify. All will be linked down below. And if you have any case suggestions, please make sure to fill out the Google form, which is also listed down below. With that, I hope you guys have an amazing week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.